Hi guys, this is Weasel. Welcome to the 7th video in the Beating the Micro series. Today we are going to be running a leak finder type video on a fellow poker player who has submitted this 4-tabling session. He played at 20 NL on 888. We're just going to see if we would play the hands in the same way and if there's any changes we'd make. Hopefully you had a chance to check out the article which was talking about floating and what is floating, which situations do you want to float. To the action, we have ace queen suited on table 4 and hero makes a 3-bet for value. We don't know anything about villain's tendencies and how he responds to 3-bets, but against an unknown it's fine to 3-bet ace queen suited against the cutoff. Table 1, we open raise jack 9 suited under the gun. It's 5-handed. It's okay, it's a little on the loose side. It would also be slightly better if the players in the blinds were not shallow stacked. And it's possible we want to be c-betting the king jack 8 board on table 1 when we do make a pair. Check calling is not really that great on this board, and check folding isn't great either. There's a good chance we can win the pot outright if we fire a c-bet on that board. Even if our jack with 9 kicker is no good, we can treat the hand like it's a semi-bluff type hand and hope to improve on the turn or river. Table 2, we open raise the 10-8 offsuit, which is fine. Table 4, we flop top set. And on such a drawy board, there are plenty of straight draws out there. Some 2-pair combos as well, although obviously we block a lot of combos like jack 10. We're mainly concerned about getting the money in as fast as possible. It is true that if we face action, we can sometimes be against a hand like Queen 9 or 7-9, but we do have still reasonable equity against this hand, and there are of course things like pocket 10s, pocket 8s that villain can have in this situation, so we definitely want to try and get all the money in as fast as possible, which is what hero does and ends up set over set. So nice hand. Table 1, we could maybe think about donking the 10 jack on the turn. It's fine to check fold, but no one's shown any real interest in the pot. Table 1, we are probably going to be playing the pocket 8s. Open raise from the button and take the blinds down. We raise the ace king from the cutoff. It's pretty standard. And against this big blind, who is sitting on less than 25 big blinds, we are quite happy to go with the hand pre-flop. And hero decides to check on the king 4-4 board. You could definitely decide to c-bet, but I do think this is probably fine. There aren't too many hands that villain can have necessarily. It would be good if we can induce a bluff on the turn of river from villain with some of his random hands like 10 jack or 10 queen, which is folding on the flop. There's no question about the fact that we want to get all the money in here given the stack sizes. It's just a case of taking the best line to make sure that villain can pay us off. The river card isn't a great river card for us. It does complete some possible straights, although hopefully villain isn't calling in the big blind with a hand like 6-7 given his stack size. This doesn't mean it's impossible. When he decides to donk out, you really need to think about what is his value range for doing this and what is his bluff range. Well, it's likely we would have heard from a King X sooner. Perhaps he has a King X hand. I think it's more likely his value range includes hands like straights and flushes he's backed into. Perhaps a hand like a 4 which he slow played. His bluff range we are obviously completely ahead of, but given the fact that he's probably not value betting too many hands that we are actually ahead of, re-raising here is probably not the greatest option, even though we were happily committed on the flop and the turn. I think my play would probably be to flat here and hope villain has some type of bluff, because against his value range I think we are actually probably behind despite having such a strong hand. And he does end up having the 6-7 suited, so he definitely shouldn't be calling such a hand pre-flop out of position with a shallow stack, but it just goes to show you can't discount these hands from people's range just because they shouldn't be playing them. Even though he's shallow and out of position, his range may not even tighten up at all. Just going to be mucking the 9-3 on table 1, and table 3 we have pocket 4s, which should be a standard open raise from the button. I do like to make my button open raises slightly smaller. I notice Hero is making them 3.5x from the button. I personally make my open raises on the button either 3x or 2.5x. However, given this particular site, which is known for having extremely fishy players, I can definitely see that there is perhaps even a good reason to raise slightly larger on the button. I personally would still be making it 3x, however, on the button, maybe 4x from earlier positions. Table 2, MP open min raises, and we have pocket aces. Definitely a fine spot to put in a raise for value, and we do get min 4 bet, and it's quite likely MP has a hand that he doesn't want to fold, maybe something like jacks plus or ace queen plus, or if he's really bad, maybe any pocket pair. I definitely think it's fine to put in a 5 bet, and Hero makes a min 5 bet, which I do actually like. At this stage the player in MP can't ever really fold any hand, but Hero is still pretty much committed to the pot. There's no flop that can come in which Hero does not want to commit post flop. And on this particular flop there are plenty of draws and also plenty of overcards that villain can have. He may even have a hand like pocket 7s that he doesn't want to fold. When he shoves the flop for just under pot size, this is pretty much a snap call, and he does end up having the pocket 6s. So pretty strange play from villain, but 888 poker is definitely one of the softest places to play online. Sometimes it can result in quite a lot of variance and upswings and downswings, just because people are so willing to get their stacks in light. But in terms of EV, it's obviously a good place to play. I seem to remember the software is also pretty reasonable. It's better than a lot of other sites. It's probably not as good as somewhere like PokerStars, but software is still pretty reasonable. Table 1, the button open raises and hero 3-bets ace jack for value. Ace jack is always going to be perhaps on the thinner side of a value 3-bet, especially if you don't know anything about villain's tendencies. It's probably going to be fine, however. Flatting is also fine without any further information. It's also interesting to note that villain is not full stacked. Therefore, sometimes it can be advantageous to play a slightly smaller pot, just so there are more stacks to play with after the flop. Against an unknown, probably my default play with ace jack there would be to flat. 3-betting's definitely fine, however. A7 suited, open raise is fine, take the blinds down. Table 2, possibly open raising the 10-8 offsuit from the button, and definitely open raising the 10-8 suited from the cutoff on table 1. The big blind looks like he might be a fishy player. When this player 3-bets versus the 10-8 suited, it's pretty much going to be a fold, although he has already 3-bet before. It's possible he's 3-betting light, but over such a small sample size, it's also possible that he is just picking up hands. Pocket 4s from under the gun. It's a standard open raise. Again, it's unfortunate that both blinds don't have full stacks. And we do get a call from the small blind, who is sitting at 40 big blinds. And when he donks his board, you could consider floating. I do think folding's the best option. On such a board, even his donk bluffs have a lot of equity against you. It's likely that even if he doesn't have a pair, he has 2 overcards or a draw. Therefore, even if you do have the best hand on the flop, you likely don't have too much equity. I think folding is definitely the best play, even though he donks only half pot or so. Table 1, the cutoff open limped, the button over limped, and hero checked back in the big blind, and decided to lead the King 10-7 board with top pair, reasonable kicker, which I think is fine. There are some draws on this board. Any hand like 8-9 or Jack Queen, and plenty of gut shot type hands also can make a call on this board. The turn is a king, and hero decides to check. I definitely think betting is fine on the turn. It's quite possible villain is not going to fold a hand like Jack Queen, or even a hand like Pocket Jacks or 10x. Not that we necessarily expect him to be open limping a hand like Pocket Jacks, but stranger things have happened on this site. He can definitely have a 10x type hand, which he is now calling again. When the king hits on the turn, it's less likely that hero has a king. Therefore, I definitely think you can fire turn and even river for value. The downside to this line is if villain does have a king, it's quite possible that he has the best king. Although not necessarily, there are still worse kings out there. I think hero was thinking that when he doesn't barrel this king 7-10 turn, it's quite likely that hero doesn't have a king, and I think he is hoping that villain is now going to semi bluff a hand like 8-9 or Jack Queen, and perhaps even value own himself with a 10x type hand. And so far he has been aggressive, so this is a definite possibility. However, if he does decide to check back, which he does, you do end up losing a lot of value. I think in this particular case, given that our kicker is reasonable, and given that it probably is less likely we have a king when the king hits a turn, I'm probably going to carry on firing on the turn for value. And then, given how his range looks, you have two options on the river. You can either check call if you think it's likely villain has a busted draw and is going to bluff the river, or you can bet again for value if you think his most likely holding is a pair type hand. There's no real way to know, but sometimes you do pick up clues through timing tells, etc. When the river comes a 7, obviously hero makes his full house. Therefore there are no hands that beat us unless villain has something like pocket 7s. Definitely want to maybe put in a bet for value here and hope to get called by a 10x type hand, or even a 7x. It's quite plausible that villain can have a 7x that he didn't want to bet the turn with, and hero takes it down, which is fine. Table 3, I think presumably hero completes and decides to fold on this queen deuce 6 board. It perhaps would be an okay spot to donk bet. The board's very dry, should have a reasonable amount of fold equity. You also have the backdoor spades on board, so you may be able to fire certain turns. Check folding is also fine. Table 4, we ISO raise with pocket 8s after under the gun, open limps, which is fine. Table 3, and I wasn't quite sure what was going on when I saw this. Hero decides to ISO raise the player under the gun with 8-9 offsuit. I don't think this is standard for hero, or whether he was maybe just confused about something. I don't think this is a good ISO raise. I think it's just a bit on the weaker side to ISO raise with. If it was a hand like ace-9 suited, you could perhaps consider an ISO raise, although suited connectors are not going to play as well against someone who doesn't have a full stack. 8-9 offsuit is definitely not going to play too well against a short stack. It doesn't seem to me there's any huge reason to believe he is a fish apart from his stack size. He probably is a fish, given his stack size, but he hasn't exactly been playing super loose or anything so far. And of course he does also open limp under the gun, therefore it's quite likely he is a fish. I probably would wait for a hand a little bit stronger than 8-9 offsuit to ISO raise. When the board comes King 9-6 and hero flops second pair, I'm definitely going to be c-betting this for value and hope he can call with anything like pocket 8 or something like Jack Queen or Jack 10 or maybe even some kind of ace high type hand. Given the fact that he is a fish, I think if he does decide to check raise on the flop, which I think is unlikely, I think it's quite possible hero has an easy fold. I would definitely be firing this flop for value. When hero checks back and villain bets the turn, it should really be a call, especially since the bet's so small. And ace is not the greatest card. I do, however, think hero probably has the best hand still, quite a reasonable amount of the time. It's just a case of whether hero can value bet. And with the ace and king out there, obviously value betting is going to be quite thin, because it's less likely that villain is going to pay you off with a hand that's worse than a pair of nines. So I definitely think, given the way the hand was played, checking back the river is fine. I don't think villain ever had an ace. I think he's probably going to be leading an ace on the river a decent amount of the time. And given the way he's played the hand, I don't think he has a king either. You could perhaps decide to put out a small value bet on the river, hope to get looked up by pocket sixes or something. Table 4, hero completes with the 10-9 suited in the small blind. I definitely think this is fine. And decides to donk the 10-3-2 board, which is okay. There are hands that can call that are worse. I don't expect a hand like pocket 8s to be folding. I don't expect any flush draw to fold. And also, playing the hand this way, hero protects himself against any overcard type hands, like if someone has ace jack. When hero gets raised by Zatoichi, which is the name of a ninja from a ninja film, if I remember correctly. I'm not sure that's relevant, but he is playing pretty tight so far. He's playing 14-11 over 85 hands. I definitely think we should be giving him a decent amount of credit when he raises here. Hero does decide to make the call. You should only really be calling on this flop if you suspect that villain is going to be bluff raising a reasonable amount of the time. Against his value range, you are obviously behind, because villain is probably never going to be value raising a hand like pocket 8s here. If he has a hand like pocket 8s, he's probably just floating. In fact, if he did raise a hand like pocket 8s on this board, it would really fall into the category of bluff raising even, perhaps. The worst hand that I think he can really ever be raising here is a better 10. And given how tight he is, I think it's completely possible that he has a hand like pocket 3s or pocket 2s. Depending on the type of player he is, he could possibly be raising a flush draw. If he had a hand like ace jack of diamonds, he could be raising here. And in a lot of situations, if you think that your opponent is capable of raising draws, you should be more likely to call with a hand like top pair. The problem with a pair of 10s, when that's your top pair, is that a lot of his draws also have overcard equity against you. So in actual fact, rather than being a favourite against a flush draw with your top pair, you are pretty much flipping if he has a hand like ace-jack of diamonds, because he also has 2 overcards to go with his flush draw. Therefore, given that villain is likely to be value betting or value raising the flop, and when he is bluff raising, his bluff raising range typically has a large amount of equity against you, I think this should really be a flop fold. Hero does decide to make the call, and it's essentially a bluff catcher, or hoping that villain does have something like ace-jack of diamonds, or hopefully he has something like 6-7 of diamonds even, and it's just a case of dodging diamonds and dodging overcards. Hero does hit his 9, which does change things slightly. The flush draw is missed, so it's quite possible Hero now has pretty good equity against villain. If villain did have a hand like ace-10, then Hero is now good. If he did have a flush draw, he's missed. If he did have an overpair, Hero is now good. The only hands Hero really needs to be worried about are pocket 3s and pocket 2s. Even a random hand like 10-3 or 10-deuce, which I don't expect villain to have, Hero is now ahead of. I think on this turn, given villain's bet sizing, you could definitely look to put in a small raise to extract value from flush draws. Given that villain is tight, I definitely don't mind just calling down. You don't want to isolate yourself against the value part of his range by raising. It's always nice to have the possibility that villain is bluffing, and when you raise, you obviously eliminate the possibility that villain is bluffing. By check calling down, you allow him to fire multiple streets with his bluff hands. Villain does end up having 10-jack. Hero does make his boat on the river, which is nice. He doesn't need to be worried about the flush, and can now obviously get value from any flushes in villain's range. Villain does end up having the 10-jack, which I think is pretty much going to be the bottom of his range for raising on this board. I don't expect villain to ever raise a worse hand than 10-jack. The raise is possibly okay, a little on the thin side, but given that there is a flush draw on the board, it's possible that raising is okay here, and hope Hero continues with some of his flush draws. But given that villain has 10 high, he is also in a similar situation to that which Hero was. Even Hero's calling range usually has a reasonable amount of equity against a hand like 10-jack, because Hero can call with a hand like ace-queen of diamonds maybe, or a hand like, although it's likely Hero is raising that hand pre-flop, but even a hand like ace-5 of diamonds, which Hero might not be raising out of position pre-flop, has decent equity against a hand like 10-jack because it has the flush draw and an overcard. So while villain's raise may be okay, it's definitely on the thin side, and I expect him more often to have at least a hand like ace-10, or perhaps even a set. Table 2 with a 6-7 offsuit, it's definitely fine to check back out of position, and it's not really quite strong enough to be making a raise. And on the ace-8 deuce board, I think it's fine to fold. Just check fold, it's not the greatest board for us. You may even have some fold equity on such a board if you were to donk bet, but you don't really have much pot equity. The only thing you can really hope to hit is a backdoor straight. Table 3, this is the same guy that we isolated before with the 8-9 offsuit, and I seem to remember, I think he perhaps had a gut shot. I know he had the queen jack, and he did play it quite passively. Given that he's so short, I definitely think we should be more than happy to get pocket jacks in pre-flop here. I'm not especially worried just because he's open raising under the gun. That doesn't necessarily mean as much as it might do if he were a decent regular. Therefore, I think raising the jacks is fine, and obviously after you've 3-bet against this specific stack size, you are not ever going to be folding at any point in the hand. Table 4, the 7-6 offsuit we can definitely raise in position with the intention of taking it down on the flop. Checking back's okay also, but given the fact that we have position and possibly fold equity on the flop, you can definitely raise a hand like 7-6 offsuit in the big blind. King 8 on table 4. You can definitely think about open raising such hands from the button. You probably have a reasonable amount of fold equity. It's a standard steal spot, and you do also have king high. You can flop some decent pairs. Both of the blinds seem reasonably tight. We actually only have 3 hands on the small blind, but the big blind has been playing 15, 13 over 40 hands. I definitely think it's probably going to be fine to raise almost any two, unless you know otherwise. You don't need to raise the absolute worst hands like 7-3 offsuit, but a hand like king high or even ace high, you can definitely be open raising against tight blinds. You don't even necessarily need to continue post flop. If you don't hit anything, you don't have to fire a c-bet. Table 1, we open raise the ace 8 from the button. King 7-4 is a standard board to c-bet. You don't necessarily need to c-bet this big. It's fine, however. On dry boards you should of course be c-betting slightly smaller. You are still going to get more or less the same amount of respect with a smaller bet, but you risk less money if villain does end up having a hand. The same goes for a hand like king 3 offsuit on table 3. You can definitely think about open raising here. The fact that both blinds are short stacked make it a little less optimal. We have the big blind who we've played a couple of hands against, who is quite likely a fish. But given that they are neither of them sitting with deep stacks, it's also fine to not open raise. Against such short stacks, if you did flop a king with your king 3 offsuit, then you would likely have to put in a decent amount more money. You may even find yourself committed. It's fine to not open raise against these particular blinds. Table 1, we do have the open ender, and villain is betting pretty small, and folding's definitely fine. The board's paired. It's more than possible hero is drawing dead. This is fine. Table 3, we could definitely consider 3-betting the Queen 9 suited here as a bluff. Hero is this tight regular who raised the 10 jack on the 10xx board earlier on table 4. He has been folding to 3-bet so far. A hand like Queen 9 suited in the big blind, it's not strong enough to call, but you could definitely consider turning it into a 3-bet bluff. Table 1 is a standard open with the king queen, and the same on table 3 with the king 10 offsuit, standard open raise. 9-7 suited from the cutoff. and we take down the blinds. Jack 4 is a fold. Pocket queens on table 1, probably going to be playing this. I'd probably raise for value here, which is what hero does. Villain is half stacked, he has 50 big blinds. Therefore I like the raise size. We should really be looking to get most of the money in by the turn here with the pocket queens. And he folds on the flop. Table 2, we do have a gut shot. However, our outs are tainted. The 8 of clubs is not going to be a good card for us. It's also possible that we are drawing dead against a flopped boat, or perhaps a hand like 6-8, where if we hit then we lose to a boat. Therefore it's definitely fine to just muck the hand here, even to such a small bet. Hero decides to call, which is okay. You just need to be very careful when you do hit. You don't have great implied odds in this situation for that reason. You actually suffer from reverse implied odds to an extent, because even when you do hit your 8, you can never be super happy about just shipping in your whole stack, because if someone does want to get all their money in on a paired board, it's more than likely they have a straight beat. So given the fact that you don't have good implieds and you perhaps even have some reverse implied odds, folding on the flop is definitely fine, even to such a small bet. If the flop was maybe 6-6-5 with one heart and no flush draw, it would probably be a better call. Ace King suited on table 3. This fish in the cutoff, open limps. We are definitely going to be thinking about ISO raising here, I would imagine. Table 4, we open raise the pocket jacks from the button, which is pretty standard. It does seem possible that the player in the small blind on table 4 is a weaker player. We should definitely be betting for value on this board. It isn't the greatest board for pocket jacks. There are a lot of hands where if they wanted to put more money on this board, they have decent equity against pocket jacks. It is somewhat useful. We do block a hand like 9-10 for the straight draw. But villain can easily have some types of flush draw, perhaps even a hand like 5-6, perhaps even a hand like pocket 7s, pocket 8s, pocket 3s, 7-8. There are a reasonable amount of hands that beat you, and for this reason I probably wouldn't raise quite as big on the flop. I definitely think raising's fine, especially given the fact that villain is a fish and he bets half pot. I would probably maybe make it more like $2 if I were to raise here. The problem being if villain 3 bets here, you can never be super happy about the situation. You probably have to stack off anyway, seeing as he's a fish. But on such a board, against someone's range that wants to stack off against your pocket jacks, you probably aren't in fantastic shape, even if you are slightly ahead. Therefore, you definitely need to think about which kind of hands you're targeting. Yes, you are targeting straight draws, which do have equity against you. Maybe a hand like pocket 9s, pocket 10s. It would be nice if he continued with some of his overcard type hands, but he's not going to continue with those to a huge flop raise. So I would raise slightly smaller on the flop, just to make sure you keep in a decent amount of hands that you beat, and don't isolate yourselves against things like 2-pair and sets. But the flop raise in itself, I definitely think is fine. Table 1, you could think about opening the Queen 3 offsuit. It's somewhat a style thing as well, you don't have to open such hands from the button. 10-Jack suited is standard open raise from the cutoff. And on table 3, I would probably be folding the King-Jack from under the gun. I would rather have the Queen 3 suited on the button than Jack-King offsuit under the gun. I think perhaps you can open a hand like King-Jack suited. Obviously it's fine if you flop the nuts, but I wouldn't be open raising King-Jack offsuit as standard from under the gun. Unless you have a very specific reason. And in this case I don't see a specific reason, because the blinds both look like they may be reasonably tight players. We have this Zatoichi guy who was in the small blind, and this Alexander guy who is sitting half stacked, but he's also been playing quite tight so far. Table 1, a standard open raise with the pocket 7s. And table 3, we flat with the deuces in the small blind, which is fine. The flop comes Queen 6-3, and we fold to a c-bet, which is fine. And table 1, on the Queen 10-3 monotone, our pocket 7s don't really look so great, probably don't have a lot of equity, therefore it's fine to fold. Just folding the 10-3. Table 2, you can think about opening the ace-4, although the player in MP did end up limping. You could even ISO raise here. It's definitely better to open raise a hand like ace-4 offsuit, or ISO raise with a hand like ace-4 offsuit, than it is to ISO raise with something like 8-9 offsuited. Table 4 with the 9-Jack suited. Calling here is fine. The player in MP does make it slightly smaller, less than 3x, which is somewhat unusual for an MP open. Normally people open raise slightly larger from MP. It may be a sign that he doesn't have much of a hand. In this case we don't mind so much if he has a very strong hand, because we have some potential to hit things like flushes and also straights, so we pretty much have good implied odds against his range. If you did think he was very strong here, and it is possible that he is strong, 10-Jack 3 is not necessarily the board you want to continue on. It depends also how wide you think he can fire the flop. Is he firing a hand like ace-king here? So far he has only been open raising 4% of the hands. I think I would assume that despite his small-ish open raise, that he's probably quite strong here, and he does c-bet very big on the flop. I don't mind so much just mucking the 9-Jack on the flop. When you call in a situation like this, you should mainly be calling because of your implied odds, so you want to hit straights and flushes and things. A weak top pair is not really the kind of hand you want to hit. If you do hit a weak top pair or even second pair, you can definitely call on the flop. Usually I would feel a lot happier about it if he didn't bet quite so big on the flop. However, given he checks a turn, then he probably doesn't have something like aces, kings, or queens. He probably has a hand like ace king or ace queen, or something like pocket sevens, which he wanted to fire a big flop bet with. And yeah, I like this small value bet on the river. You can get called by ace high, something like pocket sevens, so well played by Hero. Open raise the king nine suited from the cutoff, which is fine. Table 3, we flat the sixes in the big blind, which is fine. And we check fold on the ace 7 jack, which is fine. Table 1, we fold the 6-4, and probably fold in the king 4 and the 6-8. Ten five suited, probably going to be a fold. The button is playing very tight so far, however. He is playing 8-8 over 79 hands. Therefore, raising a hand like 10-5 suited is obviously very loose, but it's not ridiculous given that you should expect to take the blinds down a reasonable amount of the time. Definitely not a standard open raise, however. Table 4, we open raise a 6-4 suited from under the gun, which is fine. It's definitely better to open a hand like 6-4 suited than a hand like ace-10 offsuit. And the reason being is it just doesn't make dominated hands on the flop. If you flop a hand like a pair of sixes or a pair of fours, you can play it like it's a semi-bluff hand. It's an easy fold if you get re-raised, but you can perhaps even fire multiple barrels with your bottom pair as a semi-bluff, hoping to spike your two pair or trip outs. You can also make disguised flushes and straights. People don't expect you to be opening a hand like 6-4 suited. If you do want to expand your under the gun open raising range, you want to be including hands like 6-4 suited. I don't recommend you open these type of hands unless you think you have a strong edge over the table and that you have good hand reading skills. These shouldn't be standard open raises for you. A hand like ace-10 offsuit, or perhaps even ace-9 offsuit on the other hand, or jack-queen offsuit, these type of hands, you raise them from under the gun. You make weak and dominated top pair or second pair type hands. And these are also a lot more difficult to get away from. If you have bottom pair with your 6-4 suited and you get raised, it's an easy fold. If you have jack queen on a jack XX dry board and you get raised, it starts to get difficult. Is your opponent bluffing? You don't want to just throw your top pair in the muck. So in general, these types of hands, like 6-4 suited, 5-7 suited, do actually make okay hands to open raise under the gun. It's definitely an advanced play. It shouldn't be in your standard under the gun open raise. But the point is, it's almost definitely better to open raise a hand like 6-4 suited under the gun than it is to raise a hand like ace-10 offsuit, or king-jack offsuit, or jack-queen offsuit. These kinds of dominated hands which don't have too much potential for making straights and flushes and things. When we do get 3-bet with the 6-4 suited, however, it should be a pretty easy fold, especially since this guy seems to be quite a tight regular. When he 3-bets against an under the gun open and an MP call, he is repping a decent amount of strength. I expect him to have a hand maybe like Queen's Plus, or at least a decent Broadway. I don't expect him to be squeezing light in this spot. When he checks it down, I think he probably ends up having something like jacks or queens. And he does fold, so he probably has something like ace queen or ace jack for ace high. I don't think he's squeezing any small pocket pairs in that particular spot. We open raise the queen 9 on table 3 from middle position, which is definitely on the looser side. Probably just about okay. I think standard should be to fold. We do end up flopping top pair against this player who we are pretty certain is a fish. When the river comes a 10, yep, it's not a great card in that it's an overcard. I still would probably be betting the turn to a value. I don't think he's folding a hand like 8-9 or 9-jack, or perhaps even a hand like pocket 8s on the turn. If he has picked up a flush draw with some of his random floats, like something like ace-jack of hearts, he's calling again on the turn. I definitely think you should really be betting the turn again for thin value, especially against this player who can continue pretty wide. When the river comes an 8 of hearts, it's obviously a bad card in that it completes the flush draw, and it also puts a 4 to a straight on the board. Any 7 has a straight. Therefore, you can't really value bet this board. You can, however, choose to call this bet. It's going to be pretty thin. But it's fine to bluff catch on this board, it's just not fine to value bet on this board. It's pretty close. I would probably just end up mucking here. I think Villain is probably betting bigger with any of his made flushes. But he can definitely be value betting a straight. It's also possible he can be bluffing. It seems we are just checking how well the session's been going, and seems to be going pretty well so far. So, I mean, checking holder manager mid-session is something that some people will say you shouldn't do. I personally don't have a problem with it. I like to know where I'm at within any given session. The real problem is if you have a habit of checking your holder manager every 30 seconds, every time you play a pot, then you're refreshing holder manager to see what your updated balance is. And the main problem with this is that you are diverting attention which could or should be spent concentrating on the hands, and you are using that concentration to continually refresh holder manager, which is not good strategy. Some people take it to the extreme and say that they don't look at that holder manager for weeks and then they check to see how they're doing. I personally would much rather check my holder manager a couple of times a day. I mean, even for bankroll management issues, I need to know how many buy-ins I'm up or down to know which stake I can be playing, or certainly a lot of people do at any rate. If you want to not check your holder manager for a month and then see how you're doing, that's fine. But I definitely don't think there's any big problem with checking your holder manager once or twice every session, so long as you're not doing it obsessively and refreshing it every 15 seconds. Just fold the king 4, 5-7 in the big blinds. And we're probably just going to be folding the 9-3 offsuit on table 1 unless it gets checked around to us. Table 3, we could defend the ace-6 suited here. I'd probably just fold given that we are out of position and the open raiser is opening from early position and also doesn't have a full stack, which are all good reasons to not play your suited ace in this particular situation. Ace-10 offsuit. I think given that this tight regular opens from mid position, that it's fine to just be folding the ace-10 here. It may look like a nice hand, but in terms of relative hand strength, it's really not that great in this situation, especially when the player in the cutoff makes a call. You could even decide to squeeze with a hand like ace-10 offsuit, but it's actually a bluff. But seeing as you aren't going to be playing it anyway, you aren't going to be flatting with it, you could decide to squeeze with it. Zatoichi has been playing tightly to 3-bets so far. I'm not sure what the sample is, but it's quite possible if you 3-bet versus a middle position open and a cutoff call, you're going to get some respect. And if you do get called, it's not the end of the world. You probably still have some equity with a hand like ace-10 offsuit. Table 4, we open raise the ace-8 suited from cutoff, which is fine. It is of course important to notice we are slightly deep, but slightly deep, the EV of hands like suited aces definitely goes up because we can make the nuts. And we do turn a monster draw. I definitely think it's fine to be betting here. We should also take the pot down a reasonable amount of the time. And if we don't, we should have pretty good equity with our straight and flush draw. Table 2, we 3-bet the ace-queen offsuit for value, which is fine. We don't know anything about how the cutoff is responding to 3-bets so far. Against an unknown, it's definitely fine to 3-bet this for value. The board comes queen-queen 2. I would definitely be c-betting for value. C-betting pretty small, however. This is over half pot. It's okay, especially given that there's a flush draw out there. I may even be tempted to bet smaller. This is definitely fine. And I'm definitely just firing for value on the turn. Again, to get value from any flush draws, maybe worse queens. I like heroes bet sizing. This hand's fine. Ace-jack offsuit from the cutoff. Reasonably standard open raise. Just folding the jack deuce and 9-5 suited. We can definitely consider raising if it's folded to us. Both blinds are playing tightly. When the cutoff open min raises, then it's a pretty standard fold. Fold the queen 5 suited. Definitely don't think it's strong enough to open raise from MP. And table 1 with the ace-jack suited, it's probably going to be an open raise, and the same with the 10-jack suited on table 2. And table 3, we open raise the pocket 3s from under the gun, standard open raise. And we do get called on table 1. It's not the greatest board, queen 9-5. You can choose to c-bet, not c-betting is also fine. and I'm probably just folding on this turn when he donks out. I didn't catch the action on table 2, but I'd probably, when you get counterfeited on the river with the ace ace queen queen, I'm probably just going to fire a bluff. Just to try and fold him off a chop. Folding the 7-4. Table 4, the king queen offsuits. When this tight regular opens under the gun, it's definitely fine just to muck the king queen here, even in position. We are pretty dominated by this range. Multi-way, we definitely can call. There are a lot better hands we could be calling with, however, we'd much prefer to have something like 10-jack suited, or even 10-jack offsuit, because there's more ways that 10-jack offsuit can make a straight. King Queen, you're not really playing it in this particular situation for top pair value. If you do hit top pair multi-way, you're not really too happy about it. You're really hoping to hit at least 2 pair, preferably trips or a straight, and hands like King Queen aren't that great at making straights. You really want something with good potential, good implied odds. Like a hand like 5-6 suited in this particular spot would be great, because you don't get in any tough situations post flop either, because you either have a strong draw or a strong made hand which you want to continue with a hand like 5-6 suited, and if you don't, it's going to be an easy fold. Whereas a hand like King Queen, if you do flop a queen, maybe a king, so you have either top pair or second pair with an okay kicker, 4-way, you don't really want to fold because you flopped a good hand, but you aren't too happy about calling either, because 4-way your pair is going to be dominated a lot of the time. So this is the main issue really with calling King Queen, especially after under the gun open raises, is domination issues, and the fact that King Queen is more of a top pair, top kicker hand than a hand that makes straights or flushes, and multi-way against possibly strong ranges, you would much rather have a good implied odds hand like 6-7 suited than you would something with top pair, top kicker value. But given that the pot was multi-way, you are obviously then getting better odds. You can consider a call with your King Queen offsuit. I think probably my standard is just going to be to muck the King Queen offsuit and only play that situation if I have something slightly better in terms of potential. Something like 8-9 suited. Table 4, we pick up the King Queen again. And this time the cutoff open raises, and the cutoff has been open raising pretty tightly so far, 6%. Against most players this is a standard call. Against this guy, I wouldn't say it's terrible if you decided to fold. Again, you're going to run into some domination issues against such a tight open raising range. You're out of position, you're also deep stacked. These are all good reasons not to play a hand with reverse implied odds like Queen King. Obviously it's fine when you turn the nuts. And hero decides to lead here. Which I'm not too sure about. I think if you are going to lead, you may as well lead bigger. Because if either of these players has a hand like pocket sevens, they're just going to flat your small lead. But they're also going to flat your larger lead, because if they have a hand like pocket sevens, they're obviously hoping to hit their boat outs. So you might as well charge these hands to draw. I'd probably donk a little bit bigger. In this case it obviously worked out for hero because The player in position on hero decides to make a raise with a very marginal hand. Perhaps hero even induced this raise with a small bet. Or perhaps this player is just stacking off anyway with his 9-jack offsuit. It's difficult to say. Therefore, hero's lead might be okay. It's obviously quite difficult to misplay a hand when you have the nuts. If I was playing, I would probably donk lead a little bigger if I was going to donk lead. But it worked out for hero in this case. It's quite possibly fine. It all depends on what your reasoning behind that play was. Table 2, we flat the pocket 10s, which is fine against a loose opener. Table 3, we open raise the ace king offsuit and we take it down pre-flop. And we open raise the ace jack on table 3. Table 1, we're probably going to open raise the ace 10, or probably going to fold it now under the gun open raises and MP calls. Table 2, we do get 3 bets. If the other guy tags along also, then we have odds to call with our 10s. When he doesn't tag along, I probably would be folding pocket 10s here. So far, this player is playing 16-13 and has been 3-betting 4.2%, so a reasonably tight range. I don't expect pocket 10s is doing that fantastic against this range. And it's going to be very difficult to play post-flop. Yes, sometimes you are in a situation where you are flipping, and therefore in terms of pure equity you should be looking to call with a hand like 10-10 here. The problem is you don't know whether you have good equity or whether you are crushed. So one of two scenarios is going to happen. Either he is going to have a hand like ace-king, and when he flops an ace, for example on this ace-4-9 board, you pretty much have to fold. Or he's going to have a hand like pocket jacks, and when you flop an overpair, he has a better overpair. So there is a high possibility of getting stacked. Therefore, it's definitely fine to fold your 10s pre-flop. But for this very reason, if you are going to make this call, which is an advanced call, you definitely should be floating the flop very wide here. On this ace-9-4 board, you should probably be floating 100% of the time. Yes, he has ace-king in his range, but he also has a hand like 10s, jacks, and queens that you can probably fold off on the turn or river. Therefore, if you are going to call his 3-bet, which it's debatable whether it's plus EV or not, it might even be slightly minus EV depending on how he plays. In order to make this situation profitable, you need to float a large amount of flops, and ace-high boards are good boards to float. So yes, sometimes it's going to have ace-queen, ace-king here. In order to make this profitable, you do really need to float here. Because the problem is, if you're folding on this board, you are losing the pot, but then if you're committing on boards that aren't ace-high boards, you're going to be against a bigger overpair so much of the time, because if he has the ace-king on a board where you've got the overpair, he's not going to put in a large amount of money in, whereas if he has a better overpair than 10s, he's going to put a large amount of money in. So it's pretty much a lose-lose situation, and you end up playing a huge guessing game post-flop. That's why if you suspect someone is maybe 3-betting light, then, and in this case there's no real reason to suspect he's 3-betting light, but your game plan needs to be to call the 3-bet, and if you're going to call the 3-bet, then you should be floating a wide amount of flops, and you should be betting the turn if check 2. And against more aggressive players, you should sometimes be shoving over their turn bet. It's not really that applicable to micro stakes. You won't find too many players that are double barreling frequently enough in 3-bet pots for you to jam over their turn barrel. Most of the time, when they do double barrel in a 3-bet pot, they are going to have the nuts. which is exactly why when they check the turn to you, you have a good steal opportunity, because they probably do not have the nuts. On that ace XX board, I do expect him to be c-betting a hand like queens or kings some of the time, and you can definitely get him to fold these hands on the turn if he's reasonably tight, and his stats indicate so far that he is tight. So overall, I think flatting the tens there was minus EV. It's never going to be hugely minus EV, but I definitely think it's a minus EV play overall, unless you take the opportunity to bluff post-flop in various situations, and the best way of doing that is floating the flop and bluffing the turn. But you don't need to do this. Your standard should really be to just fold pocket tens against a tight 3-better. And his 3-bet stat has gone up now. He was at 4%. So who knows, he could be 3-betting light, in which case obviously flatting tens is a lot better. But if he is 3-betting light, he could have a hand like queen 10 suited or queen jack suited. He's obviously going to be c-betting that ace high board when he whiffs, so you can't just fold your pocket tens, because you are pretty much just donating money to him by doing that. But yeah, pretty interesting hand. So I think overall, Hero obviously has a pretty solid game. There are perhaps just one or two spots that I might play slightly differently myself. There was some situations where I'd probably be folding pre-flop. I definitely won't be opening a hand like King Jack offsuit from under the gun without a very solid reason. I also won't be typically ISO raising with a hand like Ace-9 offsuit. I mean 8-9 offsuit, unless someone is really bad. And they also ideally need to have a full stack. If someone's shallow, I definitely don't want to be isolating them with what is effectively 9 high. But overall, it seems Hero has a pretty solid game. So I hope you've enjoyed the video. This has been Weasel making the 7th video in the Beating the Micro series for Hold'em.ro. And good luck at the tables, and I'll see you guys soon.